In this video, I'm going to show how we can look at a person's chart without any birth time, just focusing on the rashis and planets. So this chart here is calculated for noon time. It does come with a Leo ascendant, but we don't know if this is actually the right ascendant, right? Because we don't know the exact birth time. We just know the day when he was born. And so we are going to ignore actually the ascendant and all actually the houses here as well. We just focus on the rashis and the planets. So let's get started here with the Sun and Leo. So the Sun is a person's kingdom that they want to create and where they're going to express themselves. So here Leo is empty. And so we consider this an average capacity to pursue one's inspirations and to create an ideal for oneself to live in. Is average because on based on the fact that Leo is empty. All right, so whenever Sun is empty, you can just ignore it and go right to the Lord. So here the Lord is the Sun, and it's in Taurus, or the sign of Venus, which is a natural enemy of the Sun. Okay. And so we don't like the Sun to be in Taurus because Venusian things will get in the way of the person creating a kingdom that is a reflection of who they are. Right? Venusian things are those things in the world that we want to enjoy, find comfort in, and get fulfilled by. And those desires and concerns are going to outweigh actually sort of their authentic creative inspirations. So now, the way that we're going to judge actually those planets is through the Lajitadi Avashtas, which we could say these are the psychological conditions of a person. And we can see here the planets, which are the different types of consciousness. And then we can see how they're sort of altered and modified by those various influences. So the green influences to a planet are the friendly influences, the red ones are the inimical influences, and the blue ones are the neutral ones. And sometimes there's just no influence at all. There's no aspect basically from one to another planet. Okay. So now, the Sun is getting helped here by Jupiter to 417 points and by the Moon to 275 points. It is getting hurt by Venus to 464 points and Saturn to 84 points. Okay. Now, luckily the Sun actually starts out very strong with like 568 points here. And Jupiter can actually make up for this big blemish here caused by Venus. But nevertheless, the Sun is in an enemy sign, and it sort of has to deal with that Venus starvation here, and it has to work to overcome that. Okay, so who is that person actually? So that person wanted to be a musician in the 1970s in the US, okay? And and they wanted to, sort of enjoy all the fun and fame and everything else that comes along with that sort of lifestyle at that time, in the 1970s, 1980s, and so forth. So he got himself a girlfriend, and he thought that, life is like really great, right? Life is sort of very enjoyable. He has this wonderful lifestyle. Now, all of a sudden, what happens is, his girlfriend gets pregnant, and what happens next? The baby comes, and at that time, the girl leaves them both behind. And there, his dreams of being a rock star, working on his, career as a musician and, touring with his band and all these kind of things, they all just went out of the window, right? Because now, the girl left him behind with a kid. And so now he actually had to make a living and take care of the kid. And so now the Sun here, the great person that he wanted to be, now became all about Taurus, right? Which is sort of that material security which became his greatest priority. And it was because of that Venusian activity that sort of starved the sun that, the relationship didn't work and he couldn't do anymore what he actually was, inspired to do. Instead, he just basically focused on making money. Now, whenever a planet is with a cruel planet, Saturn, Mars, or Sun, and with Rahu or Ketu, then that planet is getting shamed. So here we have Venus and Mercury getting shamed by Sun and Ketu. So there is a lot of struggle going on here in Taurus, right? There's a lot of fear, doubt, and guilt about perhaps, doing the wrong thing. I'm not sure in which direction to go, and so this person here really feels stuck in life. They needed to somehow do something to create a kingdom for themselves and their child so that they can fulfill their material needs, right? Taurus, represents the needs we have for living an enjoyable and prosperous life. And luckily here, Venus and Mercury, they're also there. Venus here is in its own sign of Taurus. Mercury is a friend to, Venus. And so these planets actually are going to dramatically help out Taurus to actually be able to create sort of this very good material life here. Okay. So what did this person do? This person actually, with his last savings, he rented out a bike shop that was more or less empty. And they just bought sort of the tools that were there and a few bikes that were inside. They rented out that place, and then they basically started to sell bikes. And so luckily here, Venus rules vehicles, which is also their best planet. And so they made the right choice, to actually sell bikes. So this was a very good choice for them. Mercury also rules business. And so he was able to, create sort of his kingdom here of, having that business of a bike shop, okay? And now, thanks to Ketu and the Sun shaming Venus and Mercury, that, trying to really build that kingdom and that material security, of course, went through quite some ups and downs. But over the years, as he persevered, thanks to Taurus being a fixed sign, he really built his business actually into one of the most successful bike shops in his area at that time, right? And he ended to become really successful in his business. But it wasn't really based on his inspirations. It was really just about, making money and creating financial security. Okay, so now next, let's next look towards Moon and Cancer. Moon and Cancer, they are about getting what we need to feel content in life. Now, Cancer here is empty, so we can just go over to the Moon. The Moon is in a sign that is actually a natural neutral to him, so the Moon is just average in that regard. The Moon, of course, we can see here gets a bit of help from the Sun and also from its other friend, Mercury, but all in all, it just comes out sort of average. So as far as recognizing his emotional needs and figuring out ways to adapt himself to getting those needs met, this Moon here is really just average. If you want to get more information about the Moon, you can look also at the planets that the Moon is influencing. And I will give you more information about how actually a person gets their emotional needs met. And you simply do this by going horizontally, you see, because this is actually sort of the planets that the Moon is going to influence. And so there you are going to get more information about which planets that the Moon helps or hinders to get his needs met. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and just look sort of, at the planet here and the influences it gets, and we also just going to look at the sign that it rules, okay? So now let's talk about Mars and his signs, right? So Mars is about using our will and having the strength to deal with problems in our life. So here Mars is in a Gemini and the two signs of Aries and Scorpio are here. Now here we can see that Rahu is in Scorpio. So this means that in this lifetime the person needs to develop their Scorpio strength, right? Which is that martial energy of your mental strength, right? So this person needs to develop that fire of their mental strength and use their will in successful ways to be able to overcome obstacles, right? So eventually what happens, this person, after years of owning the bike shop, they decided to get on the bike themselves and actually start to take part in bike races, right? They started to train hard on themselves to become a better bike racer, and those competitions helped them, right? And so for them, you know, the bike racing was really a way to develop their willpower and discipline. Before that, he had no interest in those things when he was young, right? He wasn't an athlete in school, or after that, he was just a musician. He loved to perhaps party, but definitely he was not interested in any of those types of, you know, athletic, you know, bodybuilding type things, okay? But then later on in his life, with no surprise, Rahu here in, you know, the sign of Mars, they actually started to feel a need that they need to, you know, develop their mental strength, and along with it, of course, also their body as well, in order to obviously be able to compete in those bike races, right? He actually became sort of a decent bike racer, definitely not, you know, famous or anything like that, but, you know, Rahu really pushed him to develop that determination to become really good at what he does. And yeah, and so Rahu, unless it's with other planets, you can simply see it as something that that at some point we considered it really, really important that we develop that area of our life, because we realize otherwise there's a huge imbalance. And so when we get older, we really, really want to sort of spend a lot more time in this area of our life. So Mars is here in the sign of Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is the only natural enemy of Mars. And we really don't like Mars to be there, right? Because Mars in Gemini can make a person opinionated. They get into quarrels really easily because they need to prove that they're right. But then they don't really feel confident that they get what they want because of a weak will. And then they just argue and they just don't get things done. Okay. Now Mars actually starts out okay, but it gets really badly hurt by Mercury, and there's no one planet that can really make up for it. Right? We at least need one planet that is able to help out a planet and neutralize the bad effects. And so that is not the case here. Okay. So now let's look at the Mercury signs, right, of Gemini and Virgo. So here we have Mars and also another planet, Jupiter. Now Jupiter also is in the sign of Mercury, and Jupiter also actually doesn't like to be there either, because Mercury is also his enemy. So we got two planets in the signs of Mercury who consider Mercury as their natural enemy. And, you know, that means his ability to plan towards a future that is balanced, that allows him to have an all-around fulfillment in life where he can be fulfilled on many levels, which is the job of Mercury and Mercury signs, is not looking good right here, okay? Luckily, actually, what happens is Mars and Jupiter, they are actually mutual friends, and they can help each other out to give him the ability to use his Mercury actually in okay fashion, okay? Mars and Jupiter themselves are not in great shape there, but because they are actually helping each other by being, by having sort of the same Lord, right? So now they have actually the ability to help each other. And so this actually now means that they can function sort of okay. And that is why also they will give him sort of an okay ability also with his Mercury as well. So in the running of his business, there were definitely times when he, did a very bad job. That's because, Jupiter and Mars, they are in an enemy sign, right? But then because of that conjunction of Mars and Jupiter through the same Lord Mercury, that then actually allowed him to sort of keep his business running without actually losing it. But he had huge ups and downs in his business, okay? The Mercury signs are really important for business because business is all about planning, selling, and managing a business. And Mercury is the business manager. Managing requires planning and forethought, right? Recognizing the value of something, that is what Venus gives us and the signs of Venus. But the act of actually marketing and selling and planning and commerce and all these things, that is actually ruled by Mercury. And here the Mercury signs, they are, a little damaged because of Mars and Jupiter there. But somehow or another, those two planets, they can actually, work together because they're mutual friends to somehow or another actually get him through those low periods, and over the long term actually he's sort of an okay business manager and able actually to make his business quite successful. And but the main actually reason why he was so successful actually in his business isn't actually those two planets, it is actually Venus here in Taurus. And Venus is actually also helping out Mercury, the business manager, the most, right? And why is it like that? It's because Venus basically gives you sort of the right eye for a good deal, right? He knew when something was worthwhile, right? The right bike that he needs to get, that's gonna, be, really, great to sell. And so he made basically these really, good decisions in what he was stocking and buying, right? And the other thing actually that Venus really helped him out with his business here was that, Venus, of course, is very much concerned about the customer, right? So when you have a good Venus, then in your business, you want the customer to be happy with the product, right? Venus here, of course, is also agitated by the Sun because it's not happy with the Sun. It is actually also ashamed as well, by Sun and Ketu. And so overall, probably this Venus here really just comes out as, maybe a bit better of an average Venus. But still, in his, the way that he, dealt with his customers, everyone really loved him. People always came and they wanted his help, not, his employees' help. They wanted to come to him, because he was just this sort of very likable guy that really, loved them, and he really wanted to, make sure that they were really happy with what they bought, right? And so Venus is really what supported his success more than anything. Mercury here is, is okay. It comes out actually sort of okay. It is definitely shamed again by the Sun and Ketu, but it is really greatly supported here by Venus. The big problem with his Mercury was really because of Mars and Jupiter here. And so because of that, he had those big, ups and downs, where it was really difficult for him to manage his business. At times he would totally neglect it, even for a year sometimes. And then he would just have to come back again and get his business out of a mess, right? So it was really, really hard. But gradually, as he got older, then he got really on top of the business a little bit better, okay? And so overall, we could say that, those Mercury signs here, they are okay. And Mercury it comes out also okay. It is helped by Venus. And then, it is sort of shamed by, Sun and Ketu, that got him really into all this trouble that he really felt, guilty about, of how he was actually sort of planning and managing his business. So now next, let's talk about Jupiter and Jupiter's signs here of Sagittarius and Pisces. So we already know that Jupiter sort of comes out as average, right? He is quite badly starved by Mercury, but he starts strong and he's really helped in a solid way by Mars. And so we get here sort of an average Jupiter. Now Jupiter also rules Sagittarius and Pisces, and we have Saturn here. Now with Saturn, there's always a sense of burden that comes from some big type of commitment and responsibility. And Saturn tends to cause separation and losses as well. But how happy or stressed we are with our Saturn experience really depends on the dignity of Saturn and the influences it gets from other planets. So here we can see that Saturn starts out quite strongly and then has sort of a mixed type of equal amount of good and bad influences here. The Sun and Mars are bad influences, but then Mercury and Venus, they are sort of the good influences here. And we ultimately get here sort of an average type Saturn, right? Which means that he is able to, really handle, those hardships and responsibilities, with regards to Jupiter, and perhaps also endure any type of separation and loss as well. So what does Jupiter here rule in his chart? Jupiter rules our children, of course, and we of course know that he was extremely busy with his business. And so what actually happened is he had to actually give his kid to his mother, and his mother actually raised the kid during the week. And he basically could only see the kid then during the weekends, okay? And it wasn't until the kid was in high school that finally the kid could actually come to him and live with him full time. Before that, he wasn't really involved as the primary caretaker of his own kid. And we can see that Mars here, caused sort of that separation and that hardship and burden in his life, okay, with regards to children. Now, Saturn doesn't necessarily destroy anything unless he himself is in really, really bad shape, but Saturn is always going to delay things. And so yeah, it took really time for him to get involved in raising his kid. And he actually also felt too immature that he could actually do it before that time. So next, let's talk about his Venus a little bit more, right? We have already seen that, here Venus, gets agitated by the Sun. It's also combusted actually by the Sun. It's so close. It gets shamed as well by the Sun and Ketu. Luckily, it's in its own sign. It gets helped by Mercury as well. Okay, there's also a little bit of good influences by Saturn. There's some more harm that's coming from the Moon as well, if we want to be complete in our analysis here. And yeah, so for him, there also, when we look at Taurus and at Libra, of course in Libra there's nothing to get the complete picture of his Venusian experience. That, here we can just talk about love and marriage. Of course, it started out pretty bad for him. The girl he had his, kid with just ran off and left him behind. Later on, he actually married, and he maintained actually the marriage for some time. But even that actually came to a divorce eventually. And he got married a second time, and yes, and that second marriage, is still going on strong. However, we can see here that Venus is shamed here in Taurus, okay? And it was, because of Venus being strong in its own sign and Mercury's influence, that eventually, he could rise above sort of all of these problems and actually come to, you know, to this sort of, to really this sort of stable actually marriage that, you know, he has had now. Okay. So now finally, let's talk about Saturn and Saturn signs. So we have already talked about Saturn, and we have seen that Saturn gets sort of a mixed bag of influences here, right? It gets helped out by Venus and Mercury quite a bit, but there's going to be also some bad influence of the Sun and Mars that the person has to deal with, right? Saturn signs, we only have the Moon here, which is in a neutral sign, so we can kind of ignore it now for this purpose. So what actually happened is he actually had to deal with a lot of debts, okay? Because of, you know, the way basically that he ran his business. So we can see that one of the bad influences to Saturn is the Sun here in Taurus, which deals with financial security, right, and sort of your financial abilities as well. And the other planet that is starving Saturn is Mars, of course, which is here in the sign of business management, okay? And yeah, and so it took some time here for Venus and Mercury sort of getting, you know, to really get on top of this whole situation and help out Saturn to really, you know, deal with, you know, help ultimately this person to get out of their debt and also really pay back the mortgage that they sort of, you know, had for many, many years. What actually happened is him and his wife, they bought a house. Well, him and his first wife, they bought a house with a mortgage. And then when his wife left him, he just ended up basically paying off that mortgage all by himself. And those debts, they were quite of a burden for him for many, many years. A big part of his income from his business actually was going into that mortgage. So he had quite some stress for quite some years. And the bike shop also was regularly in debt as well, more than the average bike shop, again, because of his, you know, mismanagement. So yeah, definitely, it would have been nicer to have a better Saturn, right? Not those, you know, inimical influences to Saturn. He would have had a lot less of those financial problems, okay? But overall, because Saturn did get some, you know, help, he, you know, was able to, you know, totally overcome any of those problems and actually really manages business into quite of a success, okay? So yeah, so those are the things that we can gather accurately from this person's life, just with this really simple technique of analyzing the planet and the signs it rules. And sometimes you might know the birth time, or the birth time might be off by several hours. And without, you know, rectifying the birth time, you can get a really good idea about a person simply by looking at the planet and its signs. To, you know, be able to, you know, whatever it is that you want to know about a person.